Hi again then guys, and welcome to the first of probably a number of top 10 countdowns for Gran Turismo Sport, and this time it's going to be one of the most subjective countdowns because it's all about my experience so far in the game. These are the 10 vehicles which, from my experience so far with GT Sport, I would say are the standouts for me. The coolest cars, the best cars, the cars which have really stood out as being excellent from my Gran Turismo Sport experience, and in particular new cars, because there are definitely some existing favourites which have returned. For me personally, something like the Nissan GTR Nismo is one of my favourites in the game, because we can now tune it, and it adds so much to the car's potential, but it's not a new vehicle, so we're not going to be featuring it here. These are all new cars to the franchise. So, in no particular order, it's not best to worst or worst to best, it's just the 10 best for me personally. Let's dive into the list. Kicking us off first of all then, we have the first of a couple of Porsche models to be featured in this list. Now that's not coming from someone who is a huge Porsche fan. I have a lot of respect for them, but I don't love the company as a whole. Now with that being said, Porsche is a company which is very easy to respect because although they have a very rich racing history and a history of making very impressive performance cars, they don't rest on those impressive laurels. They are always trying to improve themselves and to make their cars faster and better. And this car has a huge amount of weight on its shoulders. It's the first road-going Porsche ever to be featured on Gran Turismo. That is a whole lot of weight for this car to bear up under. But it lives up to it, as far as I'm concerned. It's a great car straight off the bat, and although it's certainly not the most beginner-friendly of vehicles, it doesn't take that long to get going with the car and to learn how it's going to react and act. And when you master it, it's a very competitive machine. You can detune it and it works amazingly well. You can tune it up, and of course, being a Porsche, it's going to be fast. Overall, the price is reasonably good. It's not too hard to attain, and it's a very good performance car. Next up, we're going to move away from the road car world and into the world of Le Mans prototype racing for the Toyota TS50. Now, we skipped over, of course, the TS40, but the TS30 set this car's bar quite high. It's also a hybrid, it's also a newer generation Le Mans machine, and it's one of the most OP race cars in Gran Turismo 6, and also a fan favourite, for good reason. This one has a lot to live up to, because not only is the TS30 already great, but so are all of the other Toyota race cars to be featured in the very long Gran Turismo franchise, including, of course, the GT1 itself, one of the best race cars of the Gran Turismo franchise, and one of the cars which has been included the most often. This, though, does a great job of living up to that lineage, and although it didn't quite win at the Le Mans in real life, it more than enough has the potential in the game to win you plenty of events. Next up, we have one of my absolute favourites, probably top 5, maybe even top 3 from Gran Turismo Sport so far, the Lamborghini Huracan, in particular the road-going version, which is cheaper than all of the other Lambos in the game. It's under 300 grand, and for that you get a car which I would genuinely say is more nimble than the Nissan GTR, but has the same kind of all-wheel drive advantage. It has just enough power to get the job done, but of course increasing it isn't going to hurt anyone. It doesn't weigh that much, in fact it's a lot lighter than both the NSX and the GTR, and it allows you to represent the brand of Lamborghini in a way which none of the Lamborghinis on Gran Turismo 6 allowed us to do. They weren't bad, but the Huracan is on a whole nother level. Next up, we have a car which I referenced just now in terms of weight, a vehicle which I haven't been driving for that long on Gran Turismo Sport, but as soon as I drove it, I fell in love with it. The Honda NSX. Now, this is a car which we already had in concept form on Gran Turismo 6, of course, and I liked it on that game, but it didn't really feel like it lived up to its true potential. The brakes weren't that good, the car felt a little bit heavy, you couldn't really tune it that much, but it was a nice concept, certainly a very exotic one and a harbinger of good things to come. And the NSX has a long lineage in the world of Gran Turismo of being a superb, not just a good, but a genuinely superb performance car, in particular the Type R models. So this, again, has a whole lot to live up to, but boy does it. This car is so fun to drive, and to me that will always go above and beyond a car that's just fast, because there are plenty of cars which can win races, but there aren't as many cars which will win races and put a smile on your face at the same time. And the NSX, as far as I'm concerned, is one of those. It's easily better than the GTR in terms of driver enjoyment, again, for me personally, and it has some definite similarities to the Huracan, that more exotic, lower, more squat driving position, but with a whole lot of power and the advantage of a hybrid all-wheel drive system. Definitely a car to check out. Next up, we return once again to the Porsche dealership, but this time not for a road car, but rather a racing incarnation of the 911, the 911 RSR. Now, this initially was a car which I didn't expect to use that much, and I didn't really care about. Both this and the Cayman were the models which I just didn't care about. As I said, the 919 and the 911 GT3 RS were the two that stood out to me. But having driven this car and used it plenty of times, it's actually now become probably my most used Group 3 machine. Maybe not in terms of mileage, but certainly in the amount of times that I've used it. This is a very good car, and even though its on-paper numbers aren't quite as good as some of the other Group 3 cars, the performance which it actually offers, both around corners and in a straight line, more than makes up for that. Next up, we have pretty much the only car on the list which I consider to have a significant downside, and that is another car which I initially didn't really care about, the Fittipaldi EF7 Vision GT car. It's a Vision GT supercar concept with some very interesting real-world implications, kind of like Horatio Pagani with the Zonda. This is one man's idea of making his ideal supercar, kind of a race car for the road with that naturally aspirated V8 engine, perfectly balanced steering, and it weighs exactly 1 ton. It's a superb supercar in every way. The handling is a joy to work with, the straight line speed is great. The only downside to this car, as far as I'm concerned, is the class. Group X means that the car just doesn't have a whole amount of use. However, this list is not just for the most race-ready vehicles, it's for the best. And even a car that you can just enjoy on its own or in one-make races can still be worthwhile. So if you do get the chance to pick up the Fittipaldi or win it, I don't think you'll be disappointed. This is a really good supercar. Next up, we return once again to Lamborghini, and more specifically the Huracan once again, but this time to the Group 3 real-world GT3 car. And the reason why this is such a significant car, and also such a good one, I would say, is actually similar to what I mentioned again in my specific review for this vehicle. And that is that although we had the Nomad GT1 Diablo already on Gran Turismo, this really feels like the first Lamborghini race car in the world of Gran Turismo that has genuine competitive usability. The Diablo is great in some ways, but it definitely has its drawbacks. This car, despite being maybe a little bit twitchier than some beginners might like, doesn't really have any downsides. It's highly competitive, it has sharp steering, great acceleration, more than enough power. In fact, it's one of the most powerful Group 3 cars as standard, and it's a Lamborghini, so it's got the desirability factor on lock. Next up, we feature a car which has been a little bit controversial, but nothing too bad. An obvious choice of car which people really wanted to get their hands on, the LaFerrari. We still don't have its main rivals, the McLaren or the Porsche, or the Jaguar CX-75 if it's me you're talking to, but at the same time it is nice to at least have this one on the game. The spiritual successor to the Enzo, and definitely superior in every way. This car already puts out the same power that the fully tuned Enzo had on Gran Turismo 6, and the performance is definitely not beginner friendly, but at the same time, very competitive. Even if you detune it down to the N800 category, it's fast. It's real fast. In fact, it can quite easily dispatch most of the Group 3 cars, actual Group 3 GT3 race cars, around tracks like the Nordschleife. So if a road car can do that, it shows the kind of potential that it's got. Next up, we return one last time on this list to the Porsche dealership for probably the most obvious choice here, especially for any who know my taste in cars and my love for Le Mans prototypes, the Porsche 919 Hybrid. Of course, this was going to make it into the list. It's a brilliant all-round prototype, and although the specs aren't as impressive as, say, the Nismo GTR, it's a great car in terms of all-round ability. The straight-line speed is more than good enough for its power. It's definitely quicker around the track than the TS50, which, as I've already discussed earlier on, isn't exactly a slouch in its own right. And to have a car this good, in a similar way to my argument for the Huracan GT3, to have this caliber of race car, a real-world Le Mans winner, to represent your love for Porsche in the game with, if you are a Porsche fan, that's quite a weapon to wield. And the 919 is just that. And perhaps a strange choice for last place, but definitely not least, is the Nissan GTR Group B rally car. I reviewed this one very recently here on the channel, and the reason why it's here is because of how much it shocked me. This car had a similar effect on me to the new shape NSX in terms of how much I enjoyed it and how surprised I was by how much I enjoyed it, but this car goes above and beyond. It is so much better and so much more enjoyable than I realistically expected it to be. I'm not a huge fan of the R35, I have a ton of respect for what it's capable of, but I just don't love the car. This one though, it feels like it was destined to be a rally car. It feels perfectly balanced, the grip is, well again, perfect as far as I'm concerned, and it suits my driving style, and I'm sure the driving style of many of others, perfectly. It's an excellent rally car, it's more than fast enough, that's for sure, and easily the best rally car in the game that I've driven so far. So overall, that's my top 10 highlights of the release day roster of Gran Turismo Sport, in particular for the cars which aren't unicorns, like the pace cars, the safety cars, the road-going versions of race cars. None of those were really included. But overall, any of these cars are definitely worth a check, because not only are they the new and exciting choices, but these ones are genuinely brilliant as well. And there are certainly others which I would have liked to have included, like the Group 3 Beetle, which I like just because it's oddball, but I had to draw the lines somewhere. So, of course, I would love to hear down below what your favourite cars of GT Sport so far are, maybe your personal top 10 even, and it will be very interesting to see how this list is affected, or maybe even releasing a new one once we do get some of that proposed DLC. But for now, that's it for this particular top 10, and of course, you can check out reviews for pretty much all of these cars here on the channel by clicking through to those at the end of this video. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.